The battlefield was chaos, but for Captain Anya Faulkner, it was the moment she was born for. Outnumbered, outgunned, and with the bitter sting of exhaustion pressing against her every move, she had one mission: hold the ridge at all costs. Beyond the crest, nestled in the valley below, was Hillhaven, a defenseless village filled with families too old or young to flee. The enemy was advancing fast, tearing through the scraggly terrain with a discipline born of months of careful planning. Their forces outnumbered hers 3-1. Her team wasn't ready. They never were. Just 3 months prior, they'd been farmers, carpenters, and students drafted into the Defense Corps. Anya crouched behind a crumbling wall, the heat of artillery fire blasting past her. Dirt and sweat clung to her face. She pressed her radio to her ear, barking orders. "Hold your positions. Nobody retreats. This ridge falls only over my dead body." Her resolve sent a charge through her platoon, each individual finding some scrap of inspiration in her words. Vince, the young medic who had never even picked up a rifle before the war, gritted his teeth as he resupplied ammunition to the sharpshooters perched above the ridge. Corporal Rao, a tattooed engineer with a quick wit and unwavering hand, worked tirelessly to keep their makeshift fortifications from crumbling under relentless mortar fire. Even Private Lynn, the timid accountant turned soldier, found the courage to fire her weapon for the first time. They were inspired by Anya. Her courage, her ability to lead, and her determination inspired them all to fight harder. But belief wasn't a match for cold, unmoving reality. Every second they held the line was paid in blood. Soldiers dropped in the mud, their cries drowned out by the ruthless sounds of war. Each casualty was a knife to Anya's soul. These people weren't just her troops. They were her responsibility, her burden. It was her name on their enlistment papers, her promises that they would survive. And every life lost reminded her of what was slipping away. Then came the tanks. The lumbering monstrosities crested the opposite hill in formation, rolling ahead of the advancing infantry like the jaws of some mechanical beast. Anya felt her chest tighten. If those machines broke through, there'd be no stopping the enemy. Hillhaven would burn. "Captain!" Rao shouted from his position near the western barricade. "We can rig the old bridge. Blow it before the tanks get across." "No!" Anya shouted back. Her mind raced. Destroying the bridge would slow the enemy down, but her forces would lose retreat access altogether, leaving them trapped. "We hold the ridge. Find another way." Tension flared to a breaking point. Lynn ran out of cover to reposition, taking a blast from a sniper's scope. The platoon medic dragged her to safety, his hands trembling as he pressed gauze to her wound. Meanwhile, shouts filled the air as enemy infantry began breaching the outer defenses. The line was cracking. Anya clenched her fist. Fear licked at the edges of her thoughts, but she shoved it aside, letting raw willpower hold her steady. She positioned herself by the main trench, raising her rifle and barking orders between rounds. "Rao, get your team to focus on those tanks. Rudy, cover Lynn and Vince." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos like a steel blade. Her orders were a lifeline, rallying her troops to keep fighting amidst the storm. Suddenly, a deafening boom shook the ridge. Rao had improvised. A remote-triggered explosion took the lead tank off its path, forcing the others to halt briefly. Anya turned and shouted over the blast, "Good work! Now keep it up!" It wasn't just a command, it was a lifeline. For hours, the battle wore on, the ridge turning into a graveyard for fallen heroes. It wasn't just brute force keeping the enemy back, it was ingenuity. Vince, wounded from shrapnel after carrying Lynn, refused to back down. He fashioned prosthetic splints from scraps, keeping soldiers on their feet. Rao and his engineers jury-rigged traps from whatever they could find, taking down enemy vehicles otherwise unstoppable. Even Anya herself pressed forward, digging in deeper and holding steadfast even as enemy defense drones unleashed hell on her position. "It's not about winning," she shouted to her remaining troops during a lull in the fighting. "It's about fighting for what matters." That belief burned brighter than the firestorms erupting around them as every soldier clung to the idea that they were defending something larger than themselves. Finally, just as the enemy seemed poised to sweep through, a distant sound grew louder, the rumble of reinforcements' engines cresting the horizon. Armored carriers from the regional battalion flooded in, pressing the enemy from behind. Exhausted, battered, but unbroken, Anya's company held their ground just long enough for relief to arrive, the tide finally turning in their favor. The ridge stood. Hillhaven lived. In the weeks after the battle, Captain Anya took time to visit her injured soldiers, thanking them for their sacrifice and bravery. Some looked at her with knowing eyes, understanding the burden she bore silently, the weight of every life lost in her command. Others clung to her presence, inspired by her example. One evening, standing before her surviving troops, Anya addressed them as the sun set on the horizon. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And I won't lie, we lost too much. Good men and women gave everything on this ridge. And I know you'll ask yourselves why you were the ones who lived when others didn't." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The truth is simple, because you held the line. In the darkest moment, when failure seemed certain and the weight of the world was crashing down, you didn't falter. You didn't run. Every inch of ground you defended, every sacrifice you made, it mattered. Not just to those villagers, but to me, to all of us, and to every soul standing behind you now." Letting her eyes sweep across the crowd, she continued, "This war isn't over, and trust me when I say there will be other ridges to hold, other battles to fight. But what you've learned here can't be taken away. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing your ground in spite of it. And when you fight for something worth protecting, you become unstoppable." Anya's words stayed with them like a second heartbeat, echoing in every step forward. The ridge became more than a battlefield that day. It became a statement, proof that even the smallest group, armed with resilience and belief, could hold against impossible odds. And for anyone who faced the horrors of war to come, Anya's lesson became a mantra. Sometimes all it takes to win is refusing to give up.